So there was this thing today, listening to my Navarro Media, which I really like. It's an English outlet, and and I was listening to it was with Gary Stevenson, my boy, the economist, economic guy, and they were discussing or they were talking to an Australian entrepreneur. As my brother pointed out to me, he used to be a car mechanic. As individually himself, he would go around and fix people's cars, and he said he was, therefore an entrepreneur. We have another friend in Boston who was a builder who went into business for himself, so he's an entrepreneur. I myself, I'm an actor, so I go, I ply my trade. I take out my wares every now and again, and I present them to people who then employ me for a limited period of time. So in a sense, I'm an entrepreneur also, et cetera, et cetera. This is not what that guy's talking about. He says he grew up in a challenged or poor part of Australia, part of the town that he was in. And he says, the only jobs around me were, the trades, building, construction, hospitality, and tourism, as well as the trades. I got a job in a McDonald's as a kid. I drove a delivery truck. I worked in a bar. Then I discovered entrepreneurship. Then the host of the show says there are people, nurses and teachers, who are incredibly valuable to us, and they're very, very badly paid. Presumably they haven't discovered entrepreneurship. Now, I wrote in a comment, there is only one entry on these lists, these quotes, which is not actually a job useful to anyone. The word is French. The one useless pastime. Entrepreneur. Why do we reward them well enough so they imagine they are useful? So that's an interesting thing. So through most of human history, for a long time we didn't have jobs. We had to go and hunt and gather and stuff like that. And we were all builders and hunters and gatherers and baby raisers and fire bringers and water boilers and stuff like that. We existed in that way. We didn't have much medicine, so we didn't need nurses, the function of nursing somebody who was wounded or not well or was dying or whatever it is fell upon somebody in the community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then there comes a point where we have, I suppose there were jobs after the agricultural revolution. So you had a mass of people who did a lot of work, and then you had another community of people who ruled those people, who owned the land, who collected the taxes, and they were doing their king thing, their monarchy thing, and then they had a bureaucracy around them. It's a very potted history. Then we get into the modern times, and more modern times, industrial revolution. So you got people who make inventions, and then they build factories, and they need people to work in the factories. So they hire people to work in the factories, and then unions come along and say, well, we need a fair share, we need a living wage, and then they get a living wage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Capitalism doesn't really matter. Capitalism, socialism, everybody's got a job in some sense, except some of us. So now today, 2025, we have this concept, and it's been around for a while. It's been creeping, it's been growing larger, that people realize that they can earn a large amount of money by doing exactly nothing, right? Now, there was a time when capitalists could make the argument that, that owning stock and investing in industry and stuff like that produced jobs. That is very true. Okay, fair enough. That's gone now. That's gone. The idea that you can buy Bitcoin, or you can, as somebody much smarter than I said, there is one job in the world of finance, which has absolutely no social value whatsoever. So we've got these other jobs on these two lists. We've got the trades, presumably electrician, plumber, carpenter, builder, etc., etc. Then we've got actual building, we've got construction, building houses, hospitals, we got hospitality, which I guess is, hotels and stuff like that. You got tourism, you got a job at McDonald's, you're serving somebody food, you drive a delivery truck, you're working in a bar. Then you discover entrepreneurship, which means that you will do nothing. He's not talking about what my brother's talking about. He's not talking about me as a freelance actor. He's talking about he found a way to make a lot of money. And this is Gary Stevenson on Novara Media. Gary Stevenson famously made a ton of money, as he calls it, millions and millions of pounds back in the aughts. He was a wizard, working class kid, a wizard at mathematics. And it's interesting that on the show, you've got the woman presenting the show, Dalia Gabriel, I believe is her name. Lovely person, very bright. And she is saying, well, I got my education. She says she's 25 at the moment, and she's a presenter on a significant platform on the internet. So she probably earns enough money to have a flat in London, right? Now, I'm not questioning her. I am questioning Gary, because Gary says, I made my millions, and now I have a YouTube channel that advises people about the iniquity of people like me earning millions. He's not quite dealt with that irony yet. So what I am saying, I'm not, to blame people who are greedy is pointless, because we probably all are. So what I'm saying is that we have a society that creates structures, creates avenues through which people can earn a living, they can earn money. You go and you get a job. Apparently today, and I understand this because of what I've heard other people say, I'm way past those early job days. And when I was in those early job days, which was really the late 60s, early 70s, I started working at 15. It was tremendously joyous. And at every level that I worked at, I earned a living wage. And then I became an actor and I earned a living wage. And then eventually I went into film and television, where I stopped earning a living wage. I started earning much more than a living wage. The only thing that made it a living wage was that I was not employed the whole year. When I get taxed on what I earn on a film, they take out huge amounts of money, right? Because they're assuming that I'm working at that fee the whole year. Well, I'm not. That's not how an actor's life works, unless you're Matt Damon or whatever. So that's that. What I'm saying is that for the first time in human history, or it's a repeat of the notion that Pharaoh, who represented something, he was a pharaoh, you'd be hard put to point out what his job was. You'd be hard put to put a number on the bushels of wheat that he harvested during the harvest season on the Nile, or whatever, rice or whatever it was. It's just not there. So you have this community of people who basically disappeared for a while. You had industrialists, yes, very rich people, nowhere near the levels of wealth of somebody like Elon Musk, an entrepreneur. So you've got this concept of this creature who will earn vast amounts of money, and somehow we have societies that have found a way to reward people with vast amounts of money who do essentially nothing. You could say they own, in other words, they are renters. They rent properties, they own stuff that you come and ask if you can borrow for a while for a fee. In England, you've got the leasehold. Disgusting. So that's how our society is, and nobody says, well, let's change it. In other words, no, absolutely. You go ahead, Gary, with your millions, and you go ahead so-and-so with your Novara Media job. Good on you. Well done. Let's raise the level of the money that's paid to everybody else, because you've got large, I mean, he's saying that if you work in the trades, this Australian entrepreneur, if you work in the trades, if you work in building, if you work in construction, if you work in hospitality, in tourism, if you work at McDonald's, if you drive a delivery truck, if you work in a bar, and then she adds, if you're a nurse or a teacher, you are unsuccessful. And that used to be something probably years and years ago. And when I was a kid, back in the dark ages, you could sort of laugh at that and say, no, I'm doing all right, mate. Don't worry about it. I like driving my truck. I like working at the steel factory. I like working at McDonald's. I like, whatever. I like being a nurse. I like being a teacher. They very often, most of the time, they do like all those sorts of things. So you go ahead. Now it is becoming impossible. And when, especially for men, and probably for women too, but I can speak for men, I say that when your sense of self and success becomes attached to something so vacuous, and I think this is really when we talk about the failures of the Democrats more recently in the recent elections, is they have become a party. They've joined the Republicans as a party of that community, of the successful. In other words, people paid, recompensed inordinately above any essential worth, any essential service, any essential contribution that they make to society. They are parasites, right? So we have found a way, probably because we never really got over the notion of kings, we have found a way of justifying that unbalanced distribution of resources. We've just done that, and it's happened slowly, creeping along, and nobody questions it. So basically, people, they keep saying this. I don't know why this occurs in politics. I really don't know why this occurs in politics. But they say, so-and-so is a senator, and he's got several billionaires on his books, and they'll give him money if he generates policy that favors them. I suppose I understand that. I don't really know why, except then that puts the politician, Labor politician, Democrat politician, that puts them, if they have that desire that the rest of the culture is manifesting, in other words, just give me money, unrelated to what I produce. Just give me money, and I will find a way of justifying my wage. In their own heads, they must justify it, or they don't justify it, so they feel guilty about it. But either way, the representation of those people who are, in huge quotation marks, because I don't buy it for a second, the people who are unsuccessful, who are not entrepreneurs, who are not Bitcoin billionaires or whatever it is, who are not Elon Musk, to call that community of people unsuccessful, you need to fucking resist it. Because it's a terrible lie, and it produces a rather strange breed of human beings whose I can't communicate with these people, and they know that when I come in the room. So I'm rescued from having to communicate with them. They smell it on me, and I smell it on them. Their values, their whole personalities are a different thing. By and large, they are men. Women may be under the same imperatives, but women somehow, to date anyway, seem to remain human beings. These men are very strange. And I think part of that, it's a Marxist notion, but I think that when you disassociate your sense of self from what you actually do in your community, what you do for your community, a process has begun that is very, very corrupting. So what will happen more and more and more is we will have more and more of these people. I was thinking today about the people who do participate in government, the people who are ruling us. The republic, the Roman Republic that I referred to, which is basically an elite. They are people with those values. They are people who have been, they have grown up in corporations, and that rubs off. Just like if you imagine if you live in a neighborhood in a city that's full of crime, that you're more likely to become criminal. If you live in a corporate world with corporate values, you're more likely to become that person. I would say criminal, you wouldn't. But it's a fine line, and I don't begrudge them it. I feel rather sorry for them because they're obviously not a happy bunch. They consume most of the drugs in the world, legal ones. But as Stevenson points out, it is there. What was that great? I pity the poor immigrant who eats but is not satisfied. This community will consume and consume and consume. They will make a thrill, and that's part of the thing. These men, particularly men, are thrilled by the fact that they have so much more than somebody else. That is their goal. They're not Greek heroes. They're not who we might imagine. Probably Julius Caesar is a very good, close example of one of those, entrepreneurs. He accumulated vast sums of sestertii by killing millions of Gauls. This new thing is not. It's simply a human being, as I encounter them, as we all encounter us, a human being who is not fearful, is comfortable, has enough, is a human being. If you create a system where a human being is only the person who becomes wealthy, and the route there these days, unless you make a movie or you make a famous sculpture or something like that, the way to wealth is through speculation, essentially what they call entrepreneurship. At the very best, you are going to run a company in which you employ a bunch of people. That used to be the great capitalist excuse, and they paid them as little as possible, therefore they became wealthy. That is not the case anymore. Now you can make vast amounts, you can access vast amounts of wealth with never encountering another human being. And that's okay if in every community there are 2 or 3 people who do that. But when that becomes the basis of your economy, in other words, the only way to survive in a society like the American society, the European, the British society, the only way to survive is to become that kind of a whore, we're in trouble. And if you're happy with yourselves, that's fine. I don't hold any grudge against you. We have very little to talk about. I have discovered over the years, but that's your deal. That's fine. I'm not calling for you for anything to happen to you. I'm just saying it is really incumbent on the rest of us to find another value in life than the one that you are advertising and making it more and more a reality that people have to. In America, essentially, you have to become wealthy simply to put your kids through college and have health care. You have to be, double 6 figures. You have to be moving in that direction. That's just the reality. When I was growing up in the States, what's that wonderful, The Honeymooners? He drives a bus. Jackie Gleason drives a bus. He doesn't have, he's not wealthy, but the show is not about him going, God, I don't have any money, I can't do this. They seem to be happy people. You did have 90%, up to 90% marginal tax rates on the very, very rich. It was an understood thing. That understanding is now gone. 10 times a day, people hit on me on TikTok And eventually I know they're going to say, will you invest in Bitcoin? You know, you can see it coming, and I'm going, why? What do you, get away from me? Because that's the racket.